Good morning. You were treated to some very good information this morning, and you were able to sit there and soak it up, and I hope you enjoyed it because your time off is over. Okay? We're going to have a facilitated discussion today to bring about some big picture thinking with regards to how we can make the goals that we all want reality. And so in the next 90 minutes, we're going to change the world, right? All right. I want to talk a little bit about really the role of using policy research to bring about the changes that we seek. And to do that, I want to start by giving you a small example, one of my favorite examples of how this has happened in the past, just as inspiration in some way for us to see that, yes, this happens, and we can use similar strategies to get those goals that we want. Now, I wrote some years up here. I don't know if everybody can see this dry erase board. The first year I wrote up here was 1976. And the reason why I wrote 1976 up here was because a very important phrase was uttered in that year that I believe helped to spawn a research genre that created a change that happened that was very, very significant some 20 years later. This particular phrase that was uttered was, welfare queen. That was the first time that Ronald Reagan was known to have used that phrase, 1976, in a previous run for presidency, an unsuccessful run for presidency. We know that that wasn't the last time that he used that phrase. He ended up using it quite successfully and wrote it all the way into the White House. That led to something else that happened in 1904 that was also very significant. A lot of these college professors in here, I'm sure, would recognize this book title, Losing Ground, Charles Murray, a very definitive book that laid out a very strong argument against the existence of welfare, saying quite strongly that we in fact needed to end the welfare state, making such bold sort of pronouncements as even, taking children and, putting them in foster care, and just all these very bold pronouncements about what we need to do instead of maintaining the welfare state. That led to about 10 years of a flurry of research and activity throughout a number of research institutions, probably most notably the Manhattan Institute, Heritage, and others. A number of opinion pieces were published. The policy discourse was changing very rapidly and very loudly during this time. This led to another book written by the same author in 1994, Bell Curve, which continued that discussion. Remember, in this time also, you had other phrases that came to be like the underclass, right? You had this discussion around the deserving and the undeserving poor. Bell Curve was making this argument that was trying to use very faulty but still somewhat statistical analysis that tried to make links between intelligence and race, correct? Then you had Dinesh D'Souza's book, interestingly titled The End of Racism, where once again he makes these very similar arguments, followed closely by what happened in 1996, which in fact was the end of welfare as we know it. TANF was passed. So you had a policy that began in 1935. AFDC, if we were to look at the tombstone of AFDC, it would say on it 1935 to 1996, right? So somewhere within there was a desire, there was a goal to change something significant, some long-standing policy that had been in place in this nation for decades. And over the course of years, a political discourse and policy writings were provided that really helped to change the conversation in this nation, that really helped to shift public opinion in such a way that you end up having a Republican presidential candidate starting out by talking about this mythology of a welfare queen, and it ends up 20 years later with a Democratic president passing welfare reform. How did we get there? We got there through these intervening passages, the power of research and really changing the discourse and getting the public opinion to turn in such a way to produce real policy action. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, or really listen to you with regards to this today. I think the first thing we need to do is engage in some big picture thinking. We are filled here with tables full of brilliance. Each of you have expertise in your area. Many of you have very similar goals, but we need to be more strategic in terms of how we work together to bring about the action that we seek. So I guess I want to start out by asking, what do you want? If you could really have somebody come up from on high and just lay at your feet exactly the policies that you want, what is that thing that you want that you think will make the biggest difference in the communities that you are seeking to serve? What are your desires? What are your goals? What should we be reaching for? So my question is to you. Any answers? So, equal opportunity, unveiling and what you're saying is very important here, that the middle class has had opportunities, actually beyond opportunities, but assistance through the tax codes to get to where they are and to maintain their position in society and above, really even the highest incomes, I would argue. And so there are advantages and disadvantages built into the system is what you're saying. How do they get there? What puts those there? What is it? Policy, right? Policy is what we're talking about. Those are the rules of the game that provides advantages and disadvantages to certain groups and not to other groups. That is something that you could argue is really what's behind the inequalities that we see. That might in some way hamper one's ability to be as responsible perhaps as you would like to be if you have inequities built into the system. Thinking now about what our specific policy goals are to get us here, to get us to where we are saying in the big picture abstract we want to be. What are your thoughts? What sort of policies do we need that maybe don't exist now, that maybe we need to end, that do exist now, that maybe we need to tweak? What are our specific policy goals at this point? Yes. All right, so now I'm going to have you guys take a minute to really strategize about these and think, okay, this is the goal. I would argue that way up here, the goal was, and maybe even since 1935 perhaps, the goal was just to end welfare. And over time, a lot of things were written and said and got a lot of publicity and made a lot of opinion pieces were published and all of that. And at the end of the day, something happened. So a lot of research happened between here and here. What I'm going to ask you is to sit at your tables, and if you have only 2 people at your tables, please go to another table. And just, please, just humor me. And I want you to think about these issues, jobs, education, and assets. And I want you to think about what is needed, what sort of research is needed to really push the envelope in the direction of achieving the goals that you would want in those areas. I'd love to have a timekeeper at your table. I'll give you about 20 minutes to do this. Okay, so you have some time for each one. And then we're going to come back, and I want to listen to you, and each table will report out, and we'll kind of decide what really makes sense in terms of moving forward. So, ready, set, go.
Elton Payne. I'm with Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. All right. So under the first category of jobs, our table came up with a set of priorities that we thought were very important to address that issue. First, we thought there should be some research, going back to what our keynote speaker was talking about this morning, some research on what would be the greatest opportunity for job growth here in America, maybe over the next 2 decades. Secondly, we thought there should be some discussion on how we reverse the impact of globalization, which is impacting our job growth. You got it? Third, we thought there should be some discussion on the reverse side of globalization on how we can increase opportunities here in America. So we looked at maybe corporate incentives for reinvesting in American jobs, maybe some through the tax code, increasing tariffs on products that are made overseas and shipped back to America by American companies. Okay, so that's it for jobs. Okay. Next, on assets, we looked at, well, we talked about some incentive for emergency savings, maybe a refundable credit that would be automatically put into a savings account, like an IDA. We also thought there should be some more promotion or discussion of a saver's credit. I wasn't aware that there was a saver's credit in the tax code, and I'm sure a lot of folks are not aware of that themselves. We talked about child development accounts and IRAs. Okay, and I think that was it for assets. Okay. And on education, we know that there are a lot of community development organizations who are doing the work at the grassroots level that might not have the time, or we know they don't have the time or the resources available to actually do research and to look into different policy initiatives. So we thought there should be some discussion on how to promote more partnerships between institutions of higher education who have that built-in capability to do research and develop policy, to marry them with community-based organizations in their communities. And one thing I don't think that we discussed, we didn't have an opportunity to discuss as a group, but as far as a national education discussion, personally I think there should be some discussion on promoting access to higher education. Maybe we should look as a nation to make at least a two-year access to higher ed a right, if you want to call it that, to make where everyone born in the United States will get at least a 2-year higher education. Not only high school, but at least 2 years. All right, and that's it.
Hello, my name is Aji Jain, and I'm a master's student at Howard University, economics major. So we talked about having some discussions on comparative advantage in terms of jobs. We should do some research on what kind of advantage, the U.S. has as opposed to other countries. Also, we would like to address the greater distribution of wage. So kind of looking at, minimum wage and things of that nature on, the distribution that among people. And those are our two for jobs. And for educational, we would like to focus on research on primary education, not just at the higher level, because it's very important as it determines where you start determines where you would go. And so I think it would be great to start at that level. Also, we would like to address low literacy rates. As we all know, we have very low literacy rate in the U.S., and we would like to do some research on why is that. Why is that a lot of places in the U.S. do not have the high literacy rate that they need to have? Why are we behind in terms of being able to read and write? Also, we should be able to look at the you guys got to help me for this word because I don't know how to pronounce it. Infrastructure.
That's
Did
right.
I just say it
You got
right?
it.
Okay. You know, of schools. A lot of schools do not have all they need. You know, when you go to, I know I've tutored at schools in the Atlanta area, and they had a library with like 4 computers. And I'm just like, how could a school with this amount of students get all the resources they need with just 4 computers in the library and a few books? So we need to look at, I guess, the disparity in schools and why some schools have it all and some schools do not. Okay, and with the assets, we kind of, I know there's like some propositions on baby bonds, which would, I guess, give children, every child that is born, and some amount of money that would kind of, I guess, maybe greaten as they are growing older, so that they can use it in terms of things like buying homes and investing and creating businesses and things of that nature. Also, we would like to look at some research on housing ownership and finance, affordability as well, and implications on the privatization of housing, whether or not housing being privatized is a good thing or a bad thing.
Awesome. We're going to move quickly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Ritchie. I work for what I like to call the only liberal think tank in Oklahoma. But I do research for the Oklahoma Policy Institute. So here's what we came up with. For jobs, we thought that it was important to look at facilitating transportation and investing in public transportation so that people can get to their jobs. They have one. That's a big problem, I know, in the Midwest. We also think that job training programs should focus more on placements when deciding what to train people for, and make sure that they're training them, giving them the skills that they need for employers that are actually hiring. And we also thought that during job training, there should be more of a focus on paying a livable wage, so that while people are getting skills to get better jobs, they can afford to do that. They can be making enough money that it's okay that they're spending that time on training. Education, we backed it up a little bit from higher education. We thought that there should be more of a focus on programs in high schools that, in low-income communities, communities of color, that focus on college preparatory activities. An example that I was familiar with called urban debate leagues, but there are all kinds of other things that focus more on maybe math and science skills, but these are programs that try and achieve parity in those communities with the kinds of academic activities that college preparatory schools are doing. And then for assets, we talked a lot about how we can get banks and traditional financial institutions to find out from communities of color and low-income communities what products and services they need, and offer those products and services, because right now they're being filled by higher cost lenders or predatory lenders. So if we can get banks to not do the same things that predatory lenders are doing, but to find out what services that those institutions are providing that are really needed in a non-predatory, more affordable way, that we could connect traditional banking, those communities, and we need to figure out how to do that. Did I get everything?
My name is Crystal Williams. I'm the state coordinator for the Asset Building Coalition in Louisiana. So my group, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything that I might leave out. So for jobs, we want to see barriers removed around existing programs to promote minority small business ownership. This would include also enforcing penalties on local banks that don't lend to minority businesses. And also, give you a chance to write that down. Okay, also to continue to extend the tax exemption to lending institutions that promote small business. And for education, more effective funding for early childhood development. And also, we discussed a lot of things with education, so it was kind of hard to put just one thing down. But one of the things that we talked about was reviewing whether or not a school should be funded based on performance. Okay, and so for assets, we focused on retirement reform. And we heard this from another group, the children's saving account. We put that under assets as opposed to, I think y'all put it under education. And also to policies to protect home ownership and keep families in their home. We want to implement those policies.
Thank you very much. Great.
There's a lot of people in here, obviously, who have a lot of experience on housing, but we didn't really have that experience at our table. We weren't sure what research was already out there for housing, and the same goes for education. So we're not sure what the answer to that would be, but maybe some kind of clearinghouse for research, because these areas all cross over: housing, jobs, jobs, education, assets. So that was something we realized towards the end of our discussion.
That's a great idea.
Also, research on behavioral economics. I think we realized at the end of our discussion that was really pertinent to both assets and education.
This is under the education. We thought it should be some type of focus on vocational training. And in addition to that, we thought in terms of, I guess this is really more for moderate to middle income families, some type of tax credit on the plus loan, so that we at least have an incentive to take loans out as parents to send our kids to college. And then under the assets, we thought that maybe some type of special credit similar to rent to own could be given to renters, so that they can build some equity, and maybe even have some type of special incentive for developers that might turn their units into rent to own. And then finally,
let me just make sure I heard you. Rent to own for businesses? Is that what you said?
No.
Rent to own
well,
for?
That's not a bad idea either.
Okay. The accidental idea.
No, for
Renter's credit. Got it. Okay.
And then finally, some research should be done on lenders that are performing well in terms of servicing low, mod, and medium income families.
Great. So
identify those lenders that, I mean, it can even be done to the point where you can see where the disparities are with respect to race and so forth, by regions, by county, female, male. So the data is out there and that is available.
Sorry to double up. I just wanted to quickly say we also focused on the idea of how do we flip the idea of the welfare queen? How do we talk about messaging and communications and making all of this data and research and priorities something that can be really taken and accepted in the mainstream? Part of that would be, or in addition to that, would be economic analyses of the impacts of all of, a demographic analysis of our country and its future, and then an economic analysis of what happens if we continue on the same path.
We're all foreign students here, so our focus was very different than everyone else in the sense of we just were thinking about, in terms of the global market, how competitive is U.S., with other countries. So for jobs, first of all, we talked about, with government regulation, like the government should, have businesses, mandate that business MNC should produce at least maybe 50% of their products in the U.S. to create like a permanent job space for everyone, just in terms of being competitive. They also looked at innovation and technology to make American products cheaper than foreign goods. So we have a lot of cheap Chinese products. So how can we compete with them? If we can innovate, if the government can produce, more innovation where we can have more capital to produce more goods, then that will be better. Then for education, like I said, we're comparing ourselves with other countries. In terms of high school education and university education, other countries are better than we are. So how can we compete so that we can have more human capital to be able to compete like in the global level in terms of technology as well. So we focused on trying to get to lower tuition first of all, and also to remove the whole demographic. And if in this demographic you have to go to this school, if in this demographic you have to go to that school, to make it more competitive so that students can start learning to be competitive at a younger level like other countries do. To make it, I think that will be beneficial to also low-income communities as well. Because if you have just like a inner-city school and you tell all kids to go there, that creates a kind of like a vacuum where you're with the same people. But if you can go to a different school where it's more competitive, then you can learn more and you can get more skills that you would not get if you're just in one school. And also for assets, we talked about, we did financial education, but we looked at it more of before it happened. So, mandate or a regulation that banks should, or it should be mandated that banks should continue financial education for assets, especially for housing. So if you lend money to someone, then you should continue to educate them financially on how they can stay on point in paying their mortgage or whatever, so that they don't get to a point where it's going to be foreclosed on. So look at it in that sense.
We just wanted to add that we had a discussion about maybe taking the whole conversation for assets out of the tax code and thinking in terms of, as Kilolo mentioned, the Homestead Act only benefited a certain group of people, but it was still a direct investment of the government into providing assets for people. Right. So if you look at the discourse on children's savings accounts now, it starts out with a direct investment of the government in an account for all children at birth, and the accounts being structured progressively so that poor and low-income children will be helped in getting more of these disbursements than other children, but still it's direct disbursements. And I think we can't forget that we need to talk in terms of those types of investments, not just investments that are pulled out of the tax code, because policymakers don't like that much for low-income people. So that one, and the other thing I wanted to mention that might have been a little different was that we felt that if you even took a small percentage of the money going to subsidize large businesses and corporations and put that into job development, skill development, ongoing small business and micro-enterprise business incentives, it would yield a huge result.
Great. So I'm just saying redistribute corporate welfare.
We, nothing necessarily specific to any of these issues, but just overarching our discussion focused on the idea of structural inequality really being fundamental to the gap that we see in all these areas, and the need to document that and look at the causes of it, because I think that there was an example here to discuss that there were policies that were passed to end discrimination or to limit discrimination that really are not effective anymore because of the structural inequality that exists. And the example was fair lending, that there are folks who just can't qualify for a mortgage, even though there are programs out there to make mortgages available. Because of the lack of wealth, because of the inability to put a down payment down, stuff like that. There's just these programs aren't effective. So really highlighting the structural inequalities that exist and reframing the narrative in that way.
Perfect. Well, I do want to thank you for your patience, because I did go a little long, but I think this was very important. And hopefully you can think about these issues and not only work on them in your respective organizations, but also really think about them later on when you have your media session, really think about how you can change that discourse and uncover some of these issues in your ability to communicate it with the broader population. So once again, thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking with you today.